The day I found my wife's wedding ring in our pastor's car was the same day he baptized our youngest daughter. 20 years of marriage shattered in the church parking lot while Amazing Grace still echoed inside. September 14th, 1999 changed my life forever. The autumn evening at Oakwood University's Baptist Student Union smelled of cinnamon and possibility. I stood frozen, watching Jessica play piano during worship. Her fingers danced across the keys, tears streaming down her face during Amazing Grace. The golden lights created a halo around her silhouette that literally took my breath away. I couldn't approach her that night. My courage failed me. For 3 weeks, I watched her from afar until Daniel, my roommate, finally pushed me toward her after service. "I've seen you watching," she said before I could speak, her voice gentle as a prayer. "I was wondering when you'd finally say hello, Tyler." Our courtship was the blueprint of Christian dating. Bible study on Thursdays, church activities on weekends, prayer journals we shared with each other. Never alone in a room with a closed door. The night I proposed at Willow Creek, the sunset turned the water to liquid gold. Jessica gasped when I knelt, her hands flying to her mouth, eyes wide with surprise, though we both knew this moment was inevitable. What I remember most was the scent of her perfume mingling with wildflowers as I slipped the ring on her trembling finger. Vanilla and lavender. The smell of home. Pastor William Miller officiated our wedding at Cornerstone Baptist, his voice carrying 40 years of spiritual wisdom. "Marriage is God's most sacred metaphor," he told the congregation. "Through it, we glimpse Christ's devotion to his church." Jessica appeared at the end of the aisle, afternoon sunlight fracturing through stained glass, casting her white dress in prismatic colors. My hands shook so violently I dropped the ring, causing ripples of gentle laughter. Her green eyes never left mine as we said our vows. Our parents wiped away tears in the front pew. Everything felt divinely orchestrated, blessed beyond measure. For 20 years, we built what everyone called a testimony to faithful living. I grew my father's struggling Harrison Construction into Harrison Building Solutions, specializing in church renovations across 3 states. Jessica excelled at First Capital Bank while raising our 3 children, Hannah, Michael, and Grace. Every Sunday, our family filed into the 3rd pew from the front, Bibles in hand, coordinated outfits pressed and perfect. Wednesday nights, our home overflowed with Bible study, laughter, and Jessica's famous apple cobbler, which she insisted needed prayer and patience to achieve its perfect consistency. "You two are what Christian marriage should look like," people would say. The younger couples called us relationship goals. Pastor Miller used us as examples in premarital counseling. The church nominated us to lead the marriage ministry for 5 consecutive years. We counseled dozens of struggling couples, believing we understood the secret to lasting love. Christ at the center, transparency always, service to each other daily, and I believed it. With my hand on my grandfather's Bible, I truly believed we were blessed and unbreakable. Every accomplishment, my growing business, our children's achievements, our beautiful Tudor home, I attributed to God's favor on our faithful marriage. I was so certain of God's blessing that when Pastor Miller announced his retirement, I volunteered to chair the search committee without hesitation. God had blessed every aspect of our lives. Surely he would guide us to the perfect new shepherd for our congregation. That confidence was the first step on a path that would dismantle everything I believed about my life, my marriage, and even my faith itself. Our search committee unanimously selected Dr. Aaron Reynolds, 38 years old, doctorate from Southern Seminary, with a proven track record of revitalizing declining congregations. His resume sparkled like his perfect white smile, growing his Atlanta church by 300%, establishing international missions, publishing books on modern evangelism. But it was his charisma during the interview that sealed our decision. He leaned forward, looking each committee member in the eye, making us feel like the most important person in the room. "God has prepared me specifically for Cornerstone," he said with absolute conviction. "I can feel it in my spirit." The first Sunday Aaron preached, Attendance swelled beyond capacity. Unlike Pastor Miller's methodical expositions, Aaron paced the platform energetically, weaving scripture with cultural references and personal stories that had the congregation alternating between laughter and profound silence. God's word isn't confined to Sunday mornings, he proclaimed, voice rising with passion. It should infiltrate your Monday meetings, Tuesday soccer practices, and Saturday Netflix binges. The energy in the sanctuary was electric. I glanced at Jessica beside me, surprised to see her completely transfixed, leaning forward slightly, her lips parted in rapt attention. Within 6 months, our traditional congregation transformed. Young families filled previously empty pews. We added a contemporary service with a worship band. The youth group tripled. The budget overflowed with new tithes. I took immense pride in having discovered this dynamic leader who was breathing fresh life into our church community. Aaron quickly integrated himself into our family's inner circle. His wife Victoria and their 2 children became regular guests at our Sunday dinners. He baptized Grace, our youngest, in a ceremony so moving that even my skeptical father-in-law wiped away tears. Aaron quoted specific prayers Jessica and I had shared with him in confidence, making the moment feel divinely personalized. When Michael struggled with faith questions during his sophomore year, Aaron spent hours with him, approaching his doubts with respect rather than dismissal. Questions aren't the enemy of faith, he told my son. They're the refining fire. Michael emerged from those conversations with a stronger, more thoughtful faith than before. After my mother's cancer diagnosis, Aaron visited the hospital daily, bringing not just prayers, but practical support, organizing meal deliveries, arranging transportation to treatments, sitting with me during the darkest hours of uncertainty. God doesn't promise protection from storms, he said, his hand firm on my shoulder. He promises his presence within them. I noticed how Jessica blossomed under Aaron's spiritual mentorship. She volunteered to lead the women's ministry he'd reimagined, spending hours developing curriculum and organizing events. Her entire countenance changed when discussing church. Her voice more animated, her gestures more expressive, her eyes brighter than I'd seen in years. Aaron believes women's ministry should be about discipleship and community impact, not just social events, she exclaimed over dinner one evening. He says I have leadership gifts that haven't been fully utilized. I was genuinely pleased seeing my wife so passionate about ministry. After 20 years of marriage and raising 3 children, Jessica deserved to explore her spiritual gifts more fully. If I occasionally noticed Aaron's gaze lingering on her during our family dinners, or his hand resting on her shoulder longer than necessary during prayer, I dismissed these observations as uncharitable thoughts. This man was our spiritual leader, a committed husband, a father who preached about sexual integrity weekly. Jessica was my faithful wife of 2 decades, mother to our children, a woman who had counseled other wives about maintaining appropriate boundaries. The possibility of inappropriate connection between them seemed not just unlikely, but impossible. The first truly unsettling moment came during our annual church picnic. I was grilling hamburgers when I overheard 2 elderly deacons talking behind the dessert table. Reminds me of that situation in Atlanta, one murmured. What situation? The other asked. About Pastor Reynolds. Heard there was a married woman involved. All hushed up, of course. Gossip is sinful, Harold, the second man admonished, noticing me nearby. They changed the subject immediately, but a seed of unease had been planted. That night I searched online for Aaron's previous church but found nothing concerning. Still, I couldn't shake the comment. Why would Harold mention something so specific if there wasn't some truth behind it? I prayed about whether to address this with Aaron directly, but decided against it. After all, we were experiencing unprecedented church growth and spiritual revival. Our family had never been more involved in ministry. My business was thriving with new church renovation contracts. Everything seemed divinely blessed. How blind I was. How willfully, tragically blind. The changes were subtle at first, like hairline fractures in a church window, barely visible until suddenly the entire structure shatters. Jessica's involvement at church intensified beyond anything in our 20 years of marriage. Committee meetings, prayer groups, counseling training, leadership development. Suddenly her calendar overflowed with church commitments 4, sometimes 5 nights a week. Our family dinner time, once sacred and non-negotiable, became increasingly rare. "This is important kingdom work, Tyler," she said when I suggested cutting back. "Aaron says most Christians are spiritually complacent, living on the leftovers of Sunday sermons. Some of us need to model real commitment." The implication in her comparison stung. Had I become spiritually complacent? I'd served as a deacon for 15 years, tithed generously, volunteered countless hours, raised our children in faith. Her language shifted in subtle ways. "Aaron believes replaced Scripture teaches in our discussions." Aaron explained this passage differently, became her response when I shared biblical insights I'd studied. Where she had once valued my spiritual leadership in our home, she now quoted Aaron's interpretations as the final authority. "Aaron says the original Greek actually means something completely different than how it's been taught," she said during family devotions one evening, dismissing my understanding of a passage I'd studied extensively in my years of teaching Sunday school. The way she spoke his name changed too, a slight softening of her voice, an intimacy in her tone I hadn't heard before. Always Aaron, never Pastor Reynolds anymore. Our physical relationship cooled dramatically. Jessica was perpetually exhausted, stressed from her increasing responsibilities, or mentally preoccupied with church projects. When I suggested a weekend getaway for our anniversary, a return to the mountain cabin where we'd celebrated our 10th, she seemed almost irritated by the interruption to her schedule. "I can't possibly get away that weekend, Tyler. Aaron's launching the community outreach program and specifically asked me to coordinate volunteers." When I gently suggested our marriage should take priority over church programming, her response felt like a slap. "Maybe your priorities need spiritual realignment." The Jessica I'd known for 20 years would never have spoken to me that way. Then came the incident at Michael's graduation party. I was at the grill, carefully turning steaks for 30 guests, when I heard Jessica's phone chiming repeatedly from the kitchen counter. Walking in for more seasoning, I caught her hunched over the phone, texting rapidly with flushed cheeks. She startled violently when I entered, nearly dropping the device. "Popular today?" I asked, trying to sound casual despite the knot forming in my stomach. "Oh, just women's ministry stuff," she replied, her voice higher than normal, the same pitch change I'd noticed when she claimed to love the hideous Christmas sweater my mother had given her. "The retreat has some logistical issues." Later that evening, I rounded the corner of our back patio and found Jessica and Aaron in what appeared to be an intense conversation. They stood inappropriately close, her hand resting on his forearm, his head bent low toward hers. When my footsteps sounded on the wooden deck, they separated with such obvious guilt that my heart began hammering against my ribs. "Tyler," Aaron's voice boomed with forced joviality. "We were just discussing the youth program budget challenges." That night, after guests had departed, I asked Jessica directly about what I'd witnessed. "You and Aaron seemed pretty intense back there. Everything okay with the youth program?" She busied herself loading the dishwasher, not meeting my eyes. "It's fine. He's concerned about funding the summer mission trip, that's all." At 11:43 p.m., her phone chimed with a message. She grabbed it quickly, angling the screen away as she read. A small smile appeared before she caught herself, noticing my observation. She set the phone down and headed for the shower without comment. When the bathroom door closed and water began running, I did something I'd never done in 20 years of marriage. I reached for her phone. The screen demanded a 6-digit passcode I didn't know. When had that changed? For our entire marriage, we'd known each other's phone passwords as a matter of transparent trust. The locked screen glared at me like an accusation. I lay awake that night, Jessica's even breathing beside me a mockery of intimacy. Was I overreacting? Was this professional closeness being distorted by my insecurity? Was I jealous of Jessica's spiritual growth and ministry success? I prayed desperately for clarity, wisdom, trust. But as the bedroom ceiling stared back at me through the darkness, a verse kept repeating in my mind from Proverbs. "The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty." On a rainy Tuesday evening in October, Jessica announced she needed to meet Aaron at church to finalize women's conference details. It was nearly 8:00 p.m., already dark outside with a steady autumn rain drumming against the windows. The conference is 4 months away, I noted, struggling to keep my tone neutral despite growing suspicion. Does this planning need to happen tonight? Jessica checked her makeup in the hallway mirror, paying unusual attention to her appearance for a simple planning meeting. Aaron's schedule is packed this week. Tonight's our only option. Something in her dismissive tone ignited a spark of anger I rarely experienced. It's always about Aaron's schedule lately, isn't it? She paused at the door, her back stiffening. What exactly are you implying, Tyler? Nothing, I sighed, suddenly exhausted by the weight of unspoken suspicions. Drive safely, it's pouring out there. She left without another word. I tried focusing on client proposals but found myself checking the clock repeatedly. At 8:50 p.m., I called the church office. No answer. I called again at 9:20 p.m. Still nothing. A strange calm settled over me as I grabbed my keys and jacket. Lord, I prayed, backing out of our driveway into the downpour. Please let me be wrong. Please let this be nothing but my own insecurity. The church parking lot contained only Aaron's black Tesla with its distinctive custom license plate. Godsward. Jessica's white SUV was nowhere visible. I circled surrounding streets, finding it parked 3 blocks away beside an elementary school, partially hidden by dense magnolia trees. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I returned to the church, parking across the street with a clear view of the main entrance. The sanctuary stood dark in the rain, but warm light glowed from Aaron's office window in the administrative wing. For an hour, I sat watching that golden square of light, rain hammering my truck roof, praying desperately, God, show me the truth, whatever it is. At 10:46 p.m., the office light extinguished. Minutes later, they emerged from the side entrance beneath a single black umbrella, Aaron's arm wrapped possessively around Jessica's waist. They paused in the shelter of the doorway, foreheads touching intimately. Then, with casual familiarity that confirmed my worst fears, he kissed her deeply, the practiced kiss of established lovers. My wife's arms wrapped around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal passion. 20 years of marriage crystallized and shattered in that single moment. My stomach heaved violently. I barely managed to open the truck door before vomiting into the rain-soaked parking lot. When I looked up again, Jessica was hurrying through the downpour toward her hidden vehicle, while Aaron returned inside. I don't recall driving home. Somehow I arrived before Jessica, composed enough to be sitting before the television when she entered at 11:25 p.m., shaking raindrops from her coat. How was the planning session? I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Productive, she replied, setting down her purse with studied casualness. We've got most of the conference details finalized. That's great, I said, watching her closely. Did you meet at church the whole time? A slight hesitation. Mostly, we grabbed coffee afterward to continue working. The lie hung between us like a physical presence, a third entity in our living room witnessing the death of our marriage. I nodded and turned back to the television screen, though I couldn't have identified what program was playing if my life depended on it. That night, I lay beside the stranger who was my wife, listening to her pretend to sleep. The few inches separating our bodies felt like an unbridgeable chasm. The woman I'd built my life around, had children with, had trusted with every part of myself, had become an alien presence beside me. Morning arrived after a sleepless night. Jessica left earlier than usual for work, kissing my cheek with such normalcy that for a disorienting moment I wondered if I'd imagined everything. Instead of heading to the construction site, I sat at our home computer, heart pounding as I tried accessing our shared church email account. The familiar password, our anniversary date plus Hannah's initials, was rejected. After several failed attempts, a sickening realization hit me. I tried Aaron R. 1984, his name and birth year. The screen populated with emails, dozens between them, dating back nearly 7 months. They'd been careful initially, disguising their messages with church business in subject lines before shifting to personal content. Last night felt like heaven itself, one read. No one has ever known me, Body, mind, and soul, the way you do, said another. When we're together, I feel God's presence more powerfully than ever, Aaron had written, twisting spiritual language to sanctify their betrayal. The most revealing email outlined their plans for the upcoming Southern Baptist Leadership Conference in Atlanta. They'd arranged to stay 2 extra days after the official event concluded, requesting connecting rooms at a hotel away from other attendees. My hands trembled violently as I printed key messages, then forwarded the entire thread to my personal account. Evidence secured, I sat at our kitchen table, where we'd shared 20 years of family meals, helped with countless homework assignments, prayed together through difficulties, and felt my world imploding. I'd discovered worse than an affair. I'd uncovered the methodical deception of the 2 people I'd trusted most completely, wrapped in the language of spiritual connection. My marriage hadn't simply been betrayed, it had been desecrated. I didn't go to work that day. How could I focus on building plans when my life's foundation had collapsed? I called my foreman pleading sudden illness, not entirely a lie, as I'd vomited twice after reading those emails. By noon, I drove to the church, needing to confront Aaron before facing Jessica. His assistant Megan smiled warmly as I approached. He's wrapping up a call with the missions committee, Mr. Harrison. Should only be a minute or 2. I nodded, clutching my manila envelope like a lifeline, knuckles white with tension. When Megan waved me in, I entered the office where I'd sought counsel countless times, where I'd wept over my mother's cancer diagnosis, where my children had received guidance, where Jessica and I had planned our 20th anniversary vow renewal just last year. Aaron looked up with his trademark charismatic smile, the one that had charmed our entire congregation, myself included. "Tyler, didn't expect to see you today." The smile faltered as he registered my expression. "Everything okay? You look terrible." I closed the door with deliberate quietness and placed the envelope on his polished desk without speaking. His manicured hands opened it slowly, expression morphing from confusion to shock to calculated neutrality as he scanned the first few printouts. I watched his pastoral mask slide into place, the same compassionate, slightly sorrowful look he'd perfected for difficult counseling sessions. "Tyler," he began, his voice taking on that soothing cadence he used during sensitive prayer requests. "I understand how these might appear, but there's context here that—" "Stop." The word emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Just stop." These messages reflect a spiritual mentorship that developed naturally through ministry partnership, he continued, shifting to his reasonable, explanatory tone. "Jessica and I have formed a connection through our service to God's kingdom, but you're sleeping with my wife." The stark words hung in the air between us. A beat of silence passed. Aaron closed the folder and leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with calculating eyes. The mask slipped, revealing something colder and more calculating beneath, something I'd never seen during his passionate sermons or compassionate counseling. "Tyler, sometimes God brings people together in ways that transcend conventional understanding," he said, voice dropping to the intimate register he used in his most moving sermons. "Jessica and I have prayed extensively about our connection. We believe what we've found is divinely orchestrated." My knees nearly buckled as bile rose in my throat. 20 years of faithful church attendance, of believing in moral absolutes and spiritual leadership, and now my pastor was invoking divine blessing on his affair with my wife. "Divinely orchestrated adultery?" I managed to choke out. "You're baptizing sin as God's will?" "The human heart is more complex than the rigid categories of traditional theology," he replied with practiced eloquence. "Jessica hasn't felt truly seen or spiritually nurtured in your marriage for years. She's been emotionally starving behind the perfect facade you've maintained." His words struck like physical blows. I recognized the phrasing from his sermon series, "Authentic faith in a facade culture." He was recycling pulpit material to justify seducing my wife. "Does Victoria know?" I asked, referring to his wife of 12 years, the mother of his children, the woman who led our church's prayer ministry. Something flickered across his face, the first genuine emotion I'd seen. "This isn't about Victoria." I'll take that as a no. I gathered the emails with trembling hands. I trusted you with my family's spiritual well-being. You were supposed to protect our marriage, not destroy it. As I reached the door, he called after me, his tone hardening. Tyler, consider carefully before you do anything rash. A public scandal would devastate this congregation. Think about your children, your business reputation in this community, the church-building project you're contracted for. I turned back, truly seeing him for the first time. Not the dynamic spiritual leader I'd believed in, but a manipulative man hiding behind religious language and emotional exploitation. You should have considered all that before you started sleeping with my wife in your church office, I replied, a strange calm settling over me. The same office where you counseled our daughter about sexual purity last year. I walked out of the church feeling oddly weightless, as if I'd set down a burden I hadn't known I was carrying. The burden of blind trust in religious authority, of unexamined faith, of believing that 20 years of devotion guaranteed protection from betrayal. Now came the harder confrontation, facing the woman who had been my partner, lover, co-parent, and best friend for half my life. Jessica arrived home around 6:15 p.m. I sat waiting at the kitchen table, the evidence arranged before me. When she saw the printed emails, her purse slid from her shoulder to the floor, keys scattering across hardwood with a metallic clatter that seemed to punctuate the end of our marriage. Tyler. Her voice emerged small, childlike. How long has it been physical? I asked, surprised by my own calm. She sank into the chair across from me, her perfectly manicured hands that had held our newborn children, wiped away their tears, caressed my face for 20 years, now twisting nervously in her lap. 7 months, she whispered, since the leadership retreat in March. I looked at the woman I'd believed I knew better than anyone on earth and saw a stranger. Do you love him? Her silence answered more eloquently than words could have. What about us? My voice finally cracked. What about Hannah, Michael, and Grace? What about 20 years of building a life together? Did that mean nothing compared to 7 months with Aaron? It's not that simple, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. You've been emotionally absent for years, Tyler. So focused on the business, on being the perfect Christian businessman and deacon. Do you know how lonely that is? Aaron sees me, really sees me. Not as your wife or the kid's mother, but as Jessica, a woman with dreams and spiritual gifts and desires. I built that business for us, I countered, my own tears flowing freely. Everything I've done has been for this family. If you were lonely, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask for counseling, for changes? Why didn't you give me a chance to be what you needed? I tried. Her voice rose with genuine anguish. For years I tried. Tyler, could we pray together more deeply? Tyler, could we have conversations beyond household logistics? Tyler, I need more intimacy than a quick kiss goodbye. But you were always satisfied with the status quo, the perfect Christian family on display every Sunday, living on spiritual autopilot. Her words landed like accusations, each one forcing me to examine truths I'd been unwilling to see. Had I grown complacent? Had I mistaken routine faithfulness for genuine connection? But whatever my failings as a husband, they didn't justify this level of betrayal. If I was such a terrible husband, you could have asked for separation, for divorce, I said. Instead, you chose deception. You chose to lie to my face daily while sleeping with our pastor, a man who held spiritual authority over both of us. Aaron says what we found together transcends conventional morality, she whispered, a soul-deep connection that God himself orchestrated. Aaron says, I echoed bitterly, always what Aaron says. Did Aaron happen to mention what Jesus says about millstones for those who cause others to stumble? Or what God says about adultery? Or did those biblical principles get conveniently reinterpreted too? Jessica looked down at her hands. We prayed about this, Tyler. We sought God's guidance. The blasphemy of it sent a surge of rage through me, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. You prayed about the best way to betray your marriage vows? You sought God's blessing on adultery? What God were you praying to, Jessica? Because it certainly wasn't the one we've worshipped for 20 years. For a moment, something like shame flickered across her face. Then her expression hardened with resolve. You can't understand because you're trapped in religious legalism. Aaron has helped me see that God's love is bigger than the boxes we put him in. What were you planning to do? I asked. Continue this indefinitely? Leave me eventually? She squared her shoulders slightly. After the Atlanta conference next month, we planned to tell you in Victoria. We wanted to handle it responsibly. The calculated betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They had a timeline, a plan. While I was obliviously running our household and supporting her church involvement, they were plotting the dismantling of 2 families. Get out, I said, my voice deadly quiet. What? Get out of this house. Tonight. Go to your sister's. Go to a hotel. Go to Aaron. I don't care. But I cannot look at you right now without wanting to scream until my lungs give out. Tyler, be reasonable. The children are all at school or with friends tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to tell them their mother has been committing adultery with our pastor. Tonight, you need to not be here. As Jessica gathered essentials in brittle silence, I noticed her wedding ring catch the light as she moved. The same ring I'd placed on her finger with trembling hands and tearful promises 20 years earlier. The ultimate symbol of covenant now reduced to meaningless jewelry. At the door, she paused, one hand on the knob. I never meant to hurt you, Tyler. It just happened. I looked at my wife of 20 years, the young pianist I'd fallen in love with, the mother who'd nursed our children through fevers and nightmares, the partner who'd stood beside me at funerals and celebrations, and felt an ocean of grief threatening to drown me. Nothing just happens, Jessica. Every secret meeting, every hidden message, every lie to my face, those were all choices. Hundreds of small choices to betray everything we built. After the door closed behind her, I sat alone in our family home, surrounded by photographs chronicling a shared life that now felt like elaborate fiction. On the mantel, our wedding portrait smiled mockingly, 2 young people filled with certainty about their future, blissfully unaware of the heartbreak waiting 2 decades down the road. That night, on my knees beside our bed, now just my bed, I poured out anguish to God in a prayer that contained no religious platitudes, no memorized scripture verses, just the raw, wounded cries of a man whose life had imploded. Why, God? Why wasn't I enough? Why wasn't our family enough? Why did you let this happen when I tried so hard to do everything right? No divine answer came. Just the deafening silence of a home that had once echoed with family laughter and was now as empty as my shattered heart. For the next 2 weeks, I moved through life like a ghost. Jessica stayed at her sister Diane's house across town. We communicated only about logistics concerning the kids. I told them we were working through some challenges, a pathetically inadequate description for the destruction of their family foundation. Jessica continued attending services, sitting with Diane rather than in our usual family pew. I couldn't bear to go, knowing Aaron still stood in that pulpit preaching about integrity and faithfulness while actively destroying a 20-year marriage. During this limbo period, I confided in Deacon James Wilson, who had been my friend since college and served as the church financial secretary. I showed him the emails. The color drained from his face as he read them. I suspected something was off with Aaron's expense reports, James admitted, rubbing his forehead wearily. Certain meals, travel reimbursements that didn't align with church events, but this is unconscionable. What James revealed next made my stomach turn. Before coming to Cornerstone, Aaron had left his Atlanta church under suspicious circumstances. The official story involved a calling to a larger ministry opportunity, but James had a seminary classmate in that congregation who hinted at inappropriate relationships with female church members. The board there handled it internally, James explained grimly. Confidentiality agreements, counseling, a carefully managed transition. Nothing concrete enough to block his appointment here, just rumors and red flags we dismissed as jealousy or misunderstanding. Together we began gathering additional evidence. James accessed church security logs showing Aaron and Jessica alone in the building late at night dozens of times, always with the security system temporarily disabled. Church credit card statements revealed dinners at intimate restaurants 30 miles away, well outside our community where they wouldn't be recognized. I discovered Jessica had opened a separate bank account where she'd been transferring small amounts from our joint savings for months, creating a financial cushion for whatever they had planned. The most excruciating task was telling our children the truth. Hannah, our oldest at 22 and in graduate school at Vanderbilt, collapsed in tears when I explained the situation during her weekend visit home. Mom and Pastor Aaron? How could they? He officiated at my baptism. Michael, 20 and a junior at UT Knoxville, reacted with cold fury, immediately blocking his mother's number and refusing all contact. "She's dead to me," he stated flatly, a declaration that broke my heart despite my own anger. No matter Jessica's betrayal, I didn't want my children to sever that maternal bond permanently. Grace, our 17-year-old, vacillated between sobbing denial and burning rage. "There has to be some explanation," she'd plead one moment, then switch to, "How could she betray us like this?" the next. Her trust in both church and family had been simultaneously shattered, leaving her spiritually adrift at a crucial developmental stage. The Saturday before the Atlanta conference, where Jessica and Aaron planned to extend their stay for a romantic getaway before breaking the news to their spouses, I made my decision. This deception would not continue another day. The truth needed to be brought to light, not just for my sake, but for the entire congregation being spiritually led by a pastor living a double life. I called an emergency meeting with the deacon board, showing them the evidence we'd gathered. Some wept openly, others sat in stunned silence. A few expressed doubt until James presented the financial and security records. By meeting's end, there was unanimous agreement. Aaron would not preach another sermon at Cornerstone without the congregation knowing the truth. Sunday morning dawned with an eerie stillness, as if the world sensed the storm about to break. I arrived at church flanked by James and 3 other deacons, my hands trembling slightly as I clutched the evidence folder. Jessica was already seated with Diane 3 rows back, tensing visibly when she spotted me. Aaron stood at the pulpit reviewing his notes, his practiced smile faltering momentarily when our eyes met before he composed himself and began the service. I took a seat in the front row, directly in his line of sight. The worship service proceeded with excruciating normalcy, familiar hymns, announcements about the upcoming fall festival, a children's moment where Aaron knelt to tell little ones about David's courage against Goliath. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me, a man preaching about courage while living in cowardly deception. When Aaron began his sermon, I nearly laughed aloud at the title displayed on the screen behind him, "Living Authentically, the Freedom of Truth in a World of Lies." Jesus tells us in John 8:32 that the truth will set you free. Aaron began, his voice resonating confidently through the sanctuary. But what does this mean for us today? It means embracing honesty in all areas of our lives, rejecting the comfortable deceptions that keep us in spiritual bondage. As he continued expounding on the destructive power of deception and the liberation of transparent living, I felt an almost out-of-body detachment, as if watching a masterful actor play a role completely contrary to his true character. How many in this congregation were being counseled by this man about their marriages? How many teenagers were being taught about sexual purity by him? How many couples sat holding hands, believing their pastor exemplified the faithful marriage he preached about? When we compartmentalize our lives, he continued, looking everywhere but at me, keeping secrets from those closest to us, we not only damage those relationships, but erect barriers between ourselves and God's transforming grace. I sat motionless, the evidence folder heavy in my hands, waiting for the moment we had planned. After the sermon, as was our church's custom, Aaron asked if anyone felt led to share a testimony or prayer request with the congregation. This was my cue. I stood, and a palpable hush fell over the sanctuary. From my peripheral vision, I saw Jessica blanch, her sister gripping her arm in confusion. "I have something to share with my church family today," I said, my voice carrying more steadily than I had expected. Aaron's practiced smile froze. "Of course, Tyler, please come forward, brother." The walk to the pulpit was both the longest and shortest of my life. Each step weighted with 20 years of marriage, countless Sunday services, the futures of two families. I placed my folder on the wooden podium and faced the congregation. Hundreds of familiar faces who had celebrated birthdays with us, attended our children's graduations, shared meals at our table. For 20 years, I began, my voice echoing in the hushed sanctuary. I've worshipped in this church with my family. I've served as a deacon, taught Sunday school, led men's retreats, and built relationships I considered sacred. I trusted this church as my spiritual home. I trusted our pastor as a man of God who would strengthen my family's faith. The congregation nodded encouragingly, many smiling supportively, completely unaware of what was coming. 1 week ago, I discovered that Pastor Aaron Reynolds has been having an affair with my wife, Jessica, for the past 7 months. The collective gasp was like a physical force, rippling through the sanctuary. Jessica's sister's mouth fell open in shock as she turned to Jessica, whose face had drained of all color. Aaron stepped forward as if to interrupt, but James and the other deacons moved to stand beside me at the pulpit. I have evidence, I continued, opening the folder with trembling hands. Emails exchanged between them describing their relationship in explicit detail. Hotel receipts, security logs from this very building showing late-night meetings when they thought no one would know. Aaron adopted his calming pastoral tone. Tyler, brother, this is neither the time nor place for personal grievances. Perhaps we should... Not the time or place? I cut him off, my voice rising. You stand in this pulpit weekly, preaching about integrity while sleeping with a married woman. You counsel couples in crisis while actively creating one in my home. You've just delivered a sermon on living authentically while living a complete lie. If not here in God's house before God's people, where should such hypocrisy be exposed? I nodded to the young man operating our audio-visual system, who had been briefed beforehand. The projector screen descended, and the first email appeared, large enough for all to see. Jessica, last night was transcendent. I've never experienced such a spiritual and physical connection with another soul. God brought us together for His divine purpose. Aaron. The silence in the sanctuary was absolute, heavy as a physical presence. I clicked through 3 more emails, each more explicit than the last, then displayed the hotel receipts and security logs. The most devastating aspect, I said, my voice finally breaking as emotion overwhelmed me, is that Pastor Aaron used the same Bible verses from our wedding ceremony 20 years ago in his intimate messages to my wife. The same sacred promises of covenant love that we made before God, he repurposed to justify adultery. I looked directly at Aaron, who stood ashen-faced beside the communion table. His charismatic confidence evaporated completely. You weren't called by God to destroy my marriage. You abused your position of spiritual authority to satisfy your desires. And this wasn't your first instance of such behavior, was it? There were others before Jessica, at your church in Atlanta. At this revelation, Elder Howard Reynolds, Aaron's father and one of our church's founding members, rose slowly from his seat in the second row. The elderly man, respected throughout our denomination for his lifetime of faithful ministry, walked with deliberate steps to the front, his weathered face a mask of grief and righteous anger. Without acknowledging his son with even a glance, Elder Reynolds reached out with trembling hands and removed the ministerial stole from around Aaron's neck, a powerful symbolic gesture that needed no verbal explanation. This church deserves better, Elder Reynolds addressed the stunned assembly, his voice quavering but resolute. My family raised this boy to honor God's word, not twist it to serve his desires. Today, I remove him from this pulpit. The Board of Elders will meet immediately following this service. What happened next remains etched in my memory with perfect clarity. Jessica fled the sanctuary in tears, her confused sister following. Aaron attempted to speak, but his microphone had been cut. And then, most unexpectedly, Victoria, Aaron's wife, approached the front from her usual seat in the side section reserved for staff families. She stood before the congregation, a small woman suddenly appearing tremendous in her dignity. I've suspected for months, she said, her voice clear despite the tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Tyler. for having the courage I lacked. To those who've been hurt by my husband's actions, especially the Harrison family, I ask forgiveness for not speaking up sooner. Her words unleashed a flood of emotion throughout the sanctuary, some members weeping openly, others sitting in stunned silence, a few already forming whispered huddles of discussion. Most powerfully, several women rose and surrounded Victoria in a protective circle, physically demonstrating support that transcended the shock of the moment. I returned to my seat, emotionally drained but somehow lighter. The deception was exposed. The truth, however painful, was finally in the open. James took over the remainder of the service, leading the congregation in a somber prayer for healing and discernment. As people filed out afterward, many stopped to embrace me, to offer support, or simply to share in wordless grief. A few hurried past with averted eyes, uncomfortable with the public revelation or perhaps loyal to Aaron despite the evidence. That day marked both an ending and a beginning, the death of the life I had known and believed in, but also the first painful step toward whatever authentic life awaited on the other side of betrayal. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. By evening, Aaron had been officially suspended pending a formal review. Within a week, he resigned from ministry entirely. Victoria filed for divorce within days, taking their children to her parents' home in Tennessee. Jessica served me with divorce papers a week after the church service, citing my public humiliation of her as grounds, an ironic accusation from the woman who had systematically deceived me for months. Our church community fractured along predictable fault lines. While most rallied around me with meals, prayer circles, and practical support, a vocal minority believed I had handled things inappropriately. Christian reconciliation should happen privately, one longtime member scolded after a tense deacons meeting. Dirty laundry shouldn't be aired in the sanctuary. Others left the church entirely, unable to reconcile their image of the charismatic, inspiring Pastor Aaron with his actions. The children suffered most acutely in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Hannah took a leave of absence from her graduate program, her academic performance plummeting as she processed the betrayal. Michael maintained his hardline stance, refusing all contact with Jessica and deleting any message from her unread. Most concerning was Grace, still living at home and witnessing my daily struggle. Her anxiety manifested physically: panic attacks before school, insomnia, a sudden fear of attending any church service. The school counselor recommended therapy, reporting that Grace expressed feeling like everything I believed in was just pretend. These collateral damages haunted me through sleepless nights. Had my public exposure of the affair, however justified, caused more harm than good? Should I have confronted them privately, worked toward a quieter resolution that might have spared my children this public humiliation? These questions tormented me as I lay awake in our suddenly too large home. The divorce proceedings turned unexpectedly vicious. Jessica's attorney argued that my construction business had been built with her support and sacrifice as a pastor's wife, entitling her to half its value and ongoing revenue. My attorney countered with the adultery evidence, arguing for a more favorable division given her marital misconduct. The legal battles drained our finances and exhausted any reservoir of goodwill that might have made co-parenting easier. Through it all, I experienced a crisis of faith unlike anything I'd known in 45 years of church attendance. If God couldn't protect a marriage dedicated to Him for 2 decades, what promises could I trust? If His appointed shepherd could become a wolf, how could I ever trust spiritual leadership again? If 20 years of faithful service culminated in such betrayal, what was the point of fidelity at all? For 4 months after that Sunday, I couldn't bring myself to attend any church. I'd drive to various parking lots on Sunday mornings, sit in my truck staring at the buildings, then drive away, unable to pass through the doors. Prayer felt like shouting into an abyss. Scripture verses I'd once found comforting now seemed like naive platitudes. I was spiritually adrift, angry at God, angry at myself for not seeing the signs sooner, angry at a religious system that elevated charismatic personalities over authentic character. My construction business suffered as I struggled to focus. Longtime clients sensed my distraction in meetings. Projects fell behind schedule. Subcontractors received confusing or contradictory instructions. The financial strain added another layer to my stress, creating a perfect storm of professional and personal crisis. The turning point came unexpectedly, 6 months after that fateful Sunday. James convinced me to meet with Dr. Thomas Callahan, a Christian counselor who had himself been a pastor for 20 years before his wife's affair with a church member led to a similar public implosion of his ministry and marriage. Dr. Callahan didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. Instead, he listened as I poured out my rage, confusion, and grief in his book-lined office. "Your faith isn't broken, Tyler," he told me after several sessions. "It's being refined in fire. Comfortable faith rarely develops depth. It's in these crucibles of pain that we discover what we truly believe, not what we've merely recited." He helped me distinguish between the failure of religious structures and the enduring reality of God's presence, between the betrayal by faith leaders and the reliability of faith itself, between the church as a human institution and the church as a spiritual reality. "What if everything I believed was just wishful thinking?" I asked during a particularly dark session. "What if there is no divine plan, no purpose to suffering, no redemption of pain?" "That's a valid question," he acknowledged. "But consider this. If there's no God, no ultimate meaning, then your pain is random and purposeless. If God does exist, your suffering may still be mysterious, but it's not meaningless. Which worldview actually offers more hope in your current situation?" His question haunted me for weeks, ultimately becoming a turning point in my spiritual journey. Gradually, painfully, I began rebuilding my shattered life. The divorce finalized after 9 bitter months, with a settlement that allowed me to keep the business, but required selling our family home. I moved into a smaller house closer to my office, a fresh start without the haunting memories of a marriage that had dissolved. I began attending a different church, a smaller congregation across town, where the pastor, David Richards, had himself experienced divorce after his wife's infidelity. His authenticity about his own struggles and subsequent healing helped me reconnect with faith, not despite my pain, but through it. "God doesn't abandon us in our darkest hours," Pastor David shared during a men's group I hesitantly joined. "Sometimes those are the moments He's carrying us, even when we can't feel His presence." What struck me most about this new church community was their comfort with questions, doubts, and spiritual wrestling. Unlike the performance-oriented faith I'd practiced for decades, these believers valued authenticity over appearance, healing over hiding, and questions over pretended certainty. My relationship with my children slowly healed as well. We established new traditions, new rhythms of family connection despite the fracture. Sunday brunches at my new house, regular video calls with Hannah at graduate school, monthly fishing trips with Michael when he could spare a weekend from college, therapy sessions alongside Grace, learning to process grief and rebuild trust together. Imperfect, awkward at times, but genuine. Grace articulated it best during one of our therapy sessions. "Before, we looked perfect, but there were all these secrets. Now we're messy, but at least we're honest about it. I think I prefer honest messiness to perfect fakeness." Jessica and Aaron moved to Colorado shortly after both divorces finalized. They married in a small civil ceremony, according to mutual friends who maintained contact with her. Within a year, however, reports filtered back that their relationship had begun to unravel. Aaron had taken a sales position with a medical equipment company, struggling to adjust to life outside ministry. Jessica had grown increasingly disillusioned as the romantic excitement faded, replaced by the mundane reality of life with a man who had already proven his capacity for deception. "What begins in betrayal rarely ends in lasting trust," our marriage counselor had warned years earlier during a session with another couple. The wisdom of those words proved prophetic. 2 years have passed since that Sunday morning when truth shattered the illusion of my perfect Christian life. The journey through betrayal, divorce, and spiritual crisis has been excruciating, but not without profound growth and unexpected grace. I've learned that authentic faith isn't about perfect circumstances or easy answers. True faith withstands questioning, doubt, even rage at God. The divine remained present through my darkest moments, not as a magical fixer of problems, but as a steady foundation when everything else crumbled. My relationship with God is less certain about religious specifics now, but more confident in the essentials: grace, truth, and the possibility of healing, even from the deepest wounds. I've discovered that forgiveness isn't a single decision, but a daily choice, sometimes made moment by moment. I haven't reached perfect forgiveness toward Jessica or Aaron, but I'm no longer consumed by bitterness. I've come to realize that forgiveness benefits the forgiver more than the forgiven. It's a key that unlocks my prison, not theirs. This ongoing journey toward forgiveness isn't for their benefit, but for my own freedom and healing. I've found strength I never knew I possessed. When your worst fears materialize and you survive, ordinary challenges lose their power to intimidate. My business has actually grown, partly because adversity forced me to focus and innovate in ways comfort never required. I've taken on larger projects, hired new staff, expanded into residential construction alongside our church specialty. Professionally, this crisis became a crucible that burned away complacency and revealed resilience. Most importantly, I've discovered the true meaning of community. The friends who sat with me in silence when words failed, who brought meals when I couldn't function, who prayed when I had no prayers left, they embodied Christ more tangibly than any sermon ever could. They revealed that church exists beyond buildings and services, in the messy, faithful showing up for one another when life falls apart. Today, my life looks nothing like I imagined it would at 47. I'm a divorced father whose 3 children are finding their own paths through the wreckage of what was once our perfect family. I attend a different church than the one where I invested 20 years of service. I'm even cautiously dating again, a strange new world after 2 decades of marriage, navigating apps and first-date conversations I never expected to have in middle age. Yet there's an authenticity to this rebuilt life that the perfect-looking version lacked. My faith is harder won but deeper rooted, less concerned with appearances and more focused on substance. My relationships with my children are more honest, built on vulnerability rather than performance. My friendships are fewer but more genuine, forged in the fire of crisis rather than the comfort of church programming. If you're facing betrayal from someone you deeply trusted, especially in a place that should have been safe, like family or church, know this: the pain is real and shouldn't be minimized. The journey through it is neither quick nor straightforward. There will be days when breathing feels like an achievement, when getting out of bed seems impossible. But you can survive this. Your story doesn't end with betrayal. What was meant to destroy you can become, with time and grace, the foundation for a more authentic life. The scars remain, but they become evidence not just of wounding, but of healing. Proof that you can be broken and still become whole again. Different but perhaps stronger at those broken places. This is Tyler Harrison signing off. Not from the perfect Christian life I once thought I had, but from something more valuable. A genuine journey of faith tested by fire and found to be real. Have you experienced betrayal by someone you deeply trusted? How did you find the strength to rebuild? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.